Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling, well, a feature of our planet that's so immense, calling it just a valley really doesn't do it justice. It's almost like calling the Pacific Ocean a big pond.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually. It undersells it dramatically.
Okay, so let's get into this. The source material we have paints a picture of, well, arguably the largest continuous geographical feature on Earth. We're talking about a massive tear in the planet's crust, stretching, what, about 6,000, maybe 7,000 kilometers?
Easily, yeah, somewhere in that range. And when people say the Great Rift Valley, that popular name, we have to immediately put it in context.
Right. It's more than just a big ditch.
Much more. Geologists prefer the term Afro-Arabian Rift System. And the key thing, the really crucial point, is that this isn't some ancient, finished valley carved by rivers. It's an active divergent plate boundary.
Active right now.
Absolutely. We're watching geology happen, albeit very slowly from our perspective. This system, the East African Rift part of it specifically, is literally splitting the African continental plate in two.
Okay, splitting Africa. So the map we see now isn't final.
Not at all. It's a work in progress. The rift is separating the main bolt of Africa, which geologists call the Nubian Plate, from the eastern section, the Somali Plate. It's being pulled eastward.
Wow. So millions of years down the line.
You'd likely see a new ocean where East Africa is now, and the Horn of Africa might be its own separate continent or maybe attached to Arabia. This whole process kicked off around 35 million years ago, and it's still shaping the landscape today.
That time scale is just staggering. Now, here's something that really jumped out at me from the sources. We tend to picture this whole thing in, East Africa, savannas, wildlife.
Kenya, Tanzania, yeah, that's the classic image.
But the geological extent, it actually starts much, much further north, like in Asia.
That's right. The northernmost reaches, the very beginning of this massive fault system, you can trace it back to Western Asia, specifically southern Turkey in the Hatay province.
Turkey, okay, that's unexpected.
Yeah, and from there, the structure that continues south is called the Dead Sea Transform Fault. This is the piece that connects the whole system through the Middle East.
It's amazing how this underlying geology just dictates everything on the surface, even like ancient history and political boundaries.
Oh, completely. These massive fault lines create dramatic topography almost instantly, geologically speaking. So this Dead Sea Transform slices right through Lebanon. It forms the Bekaa Valley, which neatly separates the Mount Lebanon Range from the Anti-Lebanon Range.
Ah, okay. I can picture that valley.
Then further south, it shapes the Hula Valley in Israel, creating that boundary between the Galilee Mountains and the Golan Heights. You see how the fault lines literally draw the map that, well, armies and nations have contended over for millennia?
And water follows the path of least resistance, right?
Yeah.
So this huge geological depression must control where the rivers go.
Precisely. Think about the Jordan River. Hugely significant, historically, religiously.
Yeah.
It's essentially just following the path carved out by this Rift Valley structure. It flows south, down the Jordan Rift Valley section, and pours into the Dead Sea.
And the Dead Sea itself is right in the rift.
Smack dab in the middle of the fault line. It's a classic rift lake, or technically a pull-apart basin along the Transform Fault. And because it's in this deep depression with no outlet to the sea, and you add the intense evaporation in the region,
It just gets saltier and saltier. And lower.
Exactly. It becomes the lowest point of dry land on Earth and incredibly saline, a direct result of the rift geology.
So it's like a funnel for water, but a dead end.
A dead end, yeah. And if you keep tracing that depression south from the Dead Sea, the rift continues. It forms the Wadi Araba, that long, arid valley south of the Dead Sea.
Okay.
Then it plunges underwater, forming the deep Gulf of Aqaba. And then from there, it basically becomes the Red Sea Rift, extending down the entire length of the Red Sea.
Wow. So the Red Sea is essentially a flooded part of this same massive rift system.
It is. An incipient ocean basin formed by the rifting apart of Africa and Arabia. All these features, from Turkey all the way down through the Red Sea, they share that same origin story, starting around 35 million years ago.
Okay, so the Red Sea is the transition zone. But the real continental tearing, the main African split, starts where that Red Sea rift meets the land again.
You got it. Right around the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula, where the Red Sea meets the Gulf of Aden and East Africa, This is where things get incredibly complex tectonically.
It sounds like a major geological intersection.
It's one of the most significant on the planet. We call it the Afar Triple Junction. Picture this.
Yeah.
You've got the Dead Sea Transform System influencing things from the north, the Red Sea Rift coming down from the northwest,
Okay.
the East African Rift proper, starting right there and heading south into the continent, and the Eden Ridge, which is an oceanic spreading center coming in from the east across the Arabian Sea.
Whoa. That's like a four-way crash of tectonic plates.
It's intense. It's less of a crash and more of plates pulling apart in multiple directions. This junction sits right in the Afar Depression in East Africa, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti. It's a famously hot, volcanically active, low-lying area.
Makes sense with all that pulling and stretching of the crust.
Exactly. This isn't just where plates meet, it's the engine room, the starting point for the main split of the African continent itself. It's ground zero for the Nubian and Somali plates moving apart.
Right. So once the rift gets properly inland from afar, moving south through Ethiopia, you mentioned it doesn't stay as one single crack.
Correct. After passing through the Ethiopian highlands, the East African Rift system does something really interesting. It splits into two main branches, two large, distinct, roughly parallel rift valleys that run side by side for hundreds, even thousands of kilometers.
Like a fork in the road, but on a continental scale.
Pretty much. And they only really merge back together much further south, down near the border of Tanzania and Zambia. This two-branch structure is what most people probably picture when they think of the East African Rift.
And these two branches, they're not identical twins, are they? The sources suggest they're quite different.
Dramatically different. And comparing them is fascinating because it shows how variations in the rifting process create total different landscapes and even chemistries. We call them the Western Rift and the Eastern Rift.
Okay, let's take the Western one first. What's its defining characteristic?
The Western Rift, often called the Albertine Rift, is characterized by significant uplift and very deep basins. It's bordered by some of the highest mountain ranges in Africa, pushed up by the rifting process. Think of the Virunga Mountains.
Named for the gorillas.
Exactly. And the Matumba Mountains and the really legendary Ruwenzori Range, the Mountains of the Moon. Huge block-faulted mountains flanking this deep valley.
And where you get that kind of deep valley structure, you often get deep lakes.
Precisely. The Western Rift is famous for its chain of incredibly deep lakes. These are often called ribbon lakes because they're long and narrow, filling these deep troughs, these grabens, created by the faulting.
How deep are we talking?
Astonishingly deep. Lake Tanganyika, for instance, is the world's second deepest lake by volume and reaches about 1,470 meters deep. That's nearly a mile straight down. Its floor is way below sea level.
Wow.
And it's also the longest freshwater lake in the world. Further south, Lake Malawi isn't quite as deep, but still hits 706 meters, making it, I think, the third deepest freshwater body worldwide by maximum depth.
And that incredible depth and the isolation of these lakes must have huge biological consequences.
Absolutely massive. These deep, ancient lakes act like isolated evolutionary laboratories. They're famous for their biodiversity, especially the explosive radiation of cichlid fish species. Hundreds of species evolved right there in each lake, uniquely adapted. It's a direct result of the geology creating these isolated, stable, deep water environments.
Which explains why so much of that area is protected, right? National parks?
Yes, Virunga National Park, Runorji Mountains National Park, Gombe Stream, where Jane Goodall worked. Many are located along the Albertine Rift, protecting these unique ecosystems born from the rift.
Okay, so that's the Western Rift. Deep, mountainous, freshwater lakes, unique biodiversity. How does the Eastern Rift compare?
Well, the Eastern Rift presents a very different picture. Geologically, it tends to be wider, shallower, and associated with more extensive volcanism, like Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya, which sit near it, though not directly in it. But the really key difference lies in the lakes.
How so?
Most of the lakes in the Eastern Rift Valley have no outlet. They are endorheic basins water flows in, but the only way it leaves is through evaporation.
Oh, okay. Unlike the Western Rift lakes, which are part of larger river systems.
Exactly. Tanganyika flows out via the Lukuga River into the Congo River system eventually. Malawi flows out via the Shire River. But these Eastern Rift lakes, they're typically self-contained.
And if water evaporates but leaves the dissolved stuff behind?
You get concentration. Over thousands of years, minerals leached from the surrounding volcanic rocks wash into these lakes and just build up as the water evaporates in the intense equatorial sun.
Leading to?
Very alkaline or soda lakes, they develop unique water chemistry, often very high in sodium carbonate and other salts.
And this is where we get those almost alien-looking landscapes, right? Like Lake Magadi.
Lake Magadi in Kenya is the extreme example. It's almost solid trona, which is sodium carbonate dicahydrate. It looks white from the air because of the crust. Then you have others like Lake Elminteda, Lake Bogoria, Lake Nakuru, all highly alkaline.
Famous for the flamingos.
Millions of them. They're one of the few creatures adapted to feed on the specialized algae and cyanobacteria that thrive in that harsh, salty, alkaline soup. So the unique geology directly creates the conditions for that incredible wildlife spectacle. The color palette is just amazing.
It really shows how geology underpins everything. But you mentioned exceptions. Not all eastern rift lakes are soda lakes.
Right, there are important exceptions. Lake Naivasha, for instance, sits right there in the Eastern Rift in Kenya, surrounded by these alkaline lakes. But crucially, it's fed by significant freshwater springs and has some subsurface outflow.
So it gets flushed out enough to avoid becoming hyperalkaline.
Exactly. It manages to maintain freshwater conditions, which is why it supports a totally different ecosystem. Hippos, lots of fish, papyrus swamps compared to its neighbors just a few kilometers away.
Fascinating contrast. Now, one more big lake we need to place, Lake Victoria. It's huge. It's right there in the region. Is it part of the rift?
That's a really important clarification. Lake Victoria is not technically a Rift Valley lake. It doesn't sit in one of the deep trenches.
Okay. So where is it then?
It actually lies in the relatively high ground, the plateau, between the western and eastern rift branches. Think of it like this. As the two rift arms pull apart to the west and east, the crust in the middle has sagged slightly, creating a broad, shallow depression.
So it's like the land sunk down in the middle because of the stretching on either side.
That's a good way to put it. It's a large, shallow basin formed due to the regional tectonic stresses of the whole rift system. So while it's not in the Rift Valley itself, its existence and location are absolutely a consequence of the rifting process.
I see. So it's part of the system, but not in the same way as Tanganyika or Nakuru.
Correct. Different formation mechanism.
Okay, let's trace the system further south. We've got the two branches joining up again in southern Tanzania. What happens then?
From where the branches rejoin, near Lake Malawi, which itself occupies the southern end of the Western Rift structure, the Rift Valley continues southward. It's expressed as the Valley of the Shire River, which flows out of Lake Malawi.
Okay, following the river valley.
Yeah, the Shire flows down towards the Zambezi River. And even south of the Zambezi, the rift structure continues. It forms the Arima Valley in central Mozambique, which is part of Gorongosa National Park. That's generally considered the southern end of the main, clearly defined East African rift system.
So from Turkey all the way down to Mozambique, that is just an immense stretch of the planet.
It truly is, covering such a vast distance, influencing the geology, the topography, the climate, the hydrology, and ultimately the ecosystems and even human history across that entire span.
So stepping back, what's the big so what? For us, for the listener, we've talked plaques, lakes, chemistry. Why does this ongoing geological drama matter?
Well, there are several huge implications. First, resources. The thinning crust and volcanic activity mean there's immense geothermal energy potential along the rift. Countries like Kenya and Ethiopia are already tapping into this in a big way. It's a major source of clean energy for the region.
Okay, geothermal power. Makes sense.
Second, as we touched on, biodiversity. The rifting process constantly creates new landscapes, isolates populations, and drives evolution. The deep lakes, the high mountains, the unique soda lakes, they all foster incredible endemism, meaning species found nowhere else on Earth. Much of Africa's iconic wildlife and unique ecosystems are concentrated along this rift system.
It's like a giant engine creating diversity.
Precisely. And third, hazards. Active fault lines mean earthquakes. Active volcanoes mean eruptions. Understanding the rift system is crucial for assessing and mitigating these natural hazards for the millions of people living within it.
Right. It's not just ancient history. It's an active, sometimes dangerous process.
Very active. And that leads to the final, really mind-bending takeaway. This isn't a finished story. The Afro-Arabian rift system, particularly the East African rift, is still working.
The splitting continues.
Day by day, year by year, the Nubian and Somali plates are moving apart, maybe only millimeters or centimeters a year, but it adds up. The forces that dug those deep lake basins, that concentrated the salts in the soda lakes, that pushed up the mountains, they are still operating right now.
So the map is literally being redrawn under our feet. Just incredibly slowly.
Incredibly slowly by human standards, yes, but relentless on a geological timescale.
So what should we leave our listeners thinking about?
Think about this. That 35 million year process isn't over. What you see today, the lakes, the mountains, the valleys, even the coastlines, is just one frame in a very long movie. Imagine what happens next.
Yeah.
Well, eventually, the rifting in East Africa will likely succeed. The crust will thin and break completely. Ocean water will flood in, probably connecting the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden southwards through Ethiopia and Kenya, maybe down towards Malawi.
Creating a new ocean.
A new ocean basin separating East Africa and the Horn of Africa from the rest of the continent. The deep rift lakes like Tanganyika might become part of this new sea. The landscape we see today is fundamentally temporary, a snapshot of a continent in the slow, powerful process of tearing itself apart. That process is happening now, and it will reshape our world. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really significant topic, one that, well, statistically affects half the population eventually, but it's still surrounded by so much misunderstanding. We're talking about menopause.
Yeah, it's often just boiled down to hormones changing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But our research, the sources we looked at, they paint a much, much bigger picture.
How so?
Well, it's not just biology. It's this really profound transition, lasts for years, involves physical changes, sure, but also psychological effects and huge variations depending on your culture, your social situation. So many people feel completely blindsided by it.
Which feels strange for something so natural.
Right, exactly. It's natural, but not necessarily easy or well understood.
And that's why we're diving deep today. Our mission really is to take you, our listener, way beyond just, hot flashes and mood swings.
Right.
We want you to come away understanding the nuts and bolts of the biology, the long-term health stuff, how experiences differ around the world, and, importantly, what actually helps manage it. A real holistic view.
And maybe we should start with the basics, the definitions, because even the terminology gets confusing.
Good idea. So menopause itself, what does it technically mean?
Technically, when doctors say menopause, they mean one specific moment in time. It's the date exactly 12 months after your last menstrual period. That's it. It marks the permanent end of your reproductive years.
Okay, so menopause is the destination, not the journey.
Precisely. It's a marker. And it usually happens somewhere between 45 and 55. Getting that clear is key because all the stuff that happens before that date,
The years leading up to it.
yeah, the time when most symptoms really kick in, that's the transition phase. And it has its own name, right? That intense lead-up period is called perimenopause. Peri means around, so literally around the menopause. This is where things often start to feel chaotic for many people.
And it's not necessarily short, is it? The sources mention it's usually, 3 or 4 years?
That's the average, yeah. But it can be much longer, sometimes 5 years, sometimes even like 10 or more, up to 14 years in some cases documented. It typically kicks off around age 47, 48 on average.
14 years is a long transition.
It really can be. And what's kind of fascinating, maybe counterintuitive, is what's happening with hormones during perimenopause.
Okay.
Most people think, oh, symptoms start because estrogen is just steadily dropping off a cliff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But actually, during perimenopause, the average estrogen level is often 20 to 30% higher than it was before all this started.
Wait, higher? How does that cause problems then? That seems backwards.
It's not about the average level, it's about the swings.
Mhm.
Massive, unpredictable fluctuations. Think of the ovaries as, like, sputtering. They're trying to respond to brain signals, but sometimes they overdo it, sometimes they underrespond.
Ah.
So you get these wild peaks and deep valleys in estradiol, the main estrogen. And it's these crazy swings, especially in the last year or two before the final period, that really drive a lot of the symptoms. The hot flashes, the mood changes, that feeling of being on a roller coaster.
So it's the instability, the lack of a predictable pattern that's the real issue.
Exactly. The body hates inconsistency. And perimenopause is defined by hormonal inconsistency. The most obvious sign for you, the listener, might be changes in your period.
Right, irregular cycles.
Yeah, it can get shorter, so you're bleeding more often, or much longer, skipping months, and the flow can change to heavier, lighter spotting in between. It's all over the place.
And this is where the sources gave a really important warning, wasn't it? About fertility during this time.
Absolutely critical, yes. While your fertility is definitely declining during perimenopause, it's not zero. Not by a long shot.
So pregnancy is still possible.
It is. You absolutely need effective contraception until you hit that official 1 year no period mark. Only then are you considered postmenopausal and no longer fertile.
Okay, so that 1-year mark is the key diagnostic point. But what if someone can't track their periods? Maybe they've had a hysterectomy or they're on hormonal birth control that stops periods anyway.
Good question. In those cases, the diagnosis isn't based on bleeding patterns. It's defined as the permanent loss of ovarian function,
How do you confirm that?
usually with blood tests measuring hormone levels,
Hmm.
specifically looking for very high levels of follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH. That tells doctors the ovaries aren't responding anymore.
Got it. So let's move into the time after that 1-year mark. Post-menopause, does everything just calm down immediately?
Not quite immediately, no. Once you're officially postmenopausal 12 months past the last period, we can confirm it with that blood test showing high FSH, usually over 25 IUL.
Okay.
But things are still shifting. FSH levels actually keep rising for about 2 more years after that final period, and estradiol keeps dropping. The body is still finding its new normal.
So even post-menopause has stages.
It does, roughly speaking. We talk about early postmenopause, which is maybe their first 5 to 8 years. During this time, those immediate symptoms like hot flashes usually start to fade and eventually disappear for most people.
And then?
Then you're into late postmenopause, which is just the rest of your life, basically. Your reproductive hormones have stabilized at their new low levels.
That timeline makes a lot more sense now. But there was one really crucial warning in the sources about postmenopause, something absolutely vital.
Yes, extremely important. Any vaginal bleeding at all, even just spotting after you have hit that 12-month mark and are officially postmenopausal, needs immediate medical attention.
Why is that such a red flag?
Because it absolutely has to be investigated to rule out serious issues, particularly endometrial cancer. It is never considered normal and cannot be ignored.
Okay, timeline established. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the symptoms, the immediate physical stuff people experience.
Right. The most famous ones, probably, are the vasomotor symptoms, or VMS. That's the technical term for hot flashes and night sweats.
Describe a typical hot flash. What does it feel like?
It usually comes on suddenly, this intense wave of heat, often starting in the chest and face, spreading outwards. Your skin might flush red. It can last anywhere from, say, 30 seconds up to maybe 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Wow.
Yeah, and it's often followed by heavy sweating, and then sometimes, weirdly, you get chills or shivering as your body tries to cool back down.
And they're not just a brief annoyance, are they?
Oh, definitely not. They're the most common symptom, affect a huge number of women, and they can go on for years, often 4 to 5 years, sometimes even longer, well into postmenopause. They massively disrupt sleep, work, just life.
Beyond the hot flashes, what about changes in the urogenital area? That seems less talked about, but equally impactful.
It really is, and these changes often persist long after hot flashes stop. It's all driven by the lack of estrogen affecting those tissues, so you get vaginal dryness, which can make sex painful. That's called dyspareunia. There's also something called atrophic vaginitis. The membranes of the vulva, vagina, even the lower urinary tract, they get thinner, less elastic, more fragile.
And that fragility causes problems.
Yeah, it can lead to irritation, burning, increased risk of infections, and because the urinary tract is affected too.
Ah, that connects to bladder issues.
Exactly. You might experience urinary urgency, feeling like you have to go right now, more frequent urination, or even leakage, like stress or urge incontinence. It can really impact daily confidence and activity.
Okay, so VMS, urogenital changes. What else is on the physical symptom list? Our sources mentioned quite a few.
Yeah, it's a long list. Things like joint soreness, stiffness, maybe new back pain, unexplained heart palpitations can happen, headaches, a general lack of energy, that sort of persistent fatigue.
And the weight gain people often talk about.
Yes, often specifically an increase in fat around the abdomen, the middle section. That central fat gain is a particular worry.
Why is that specific fat gain concerning?
Because that visceral fat, the fat deep inside around your organs, is metabolically active. It pumps out inflammatory substances and is directly linked to higher risks for heart disease and diabetes down the line.
Right. Now, let's shift to the cognitive and mood stuff. Anxiety, irritability, low mood. These come up constantly.
They do. Very common complaints. But here's where the sources really urge caution.
How so?
They stress that while these psychological symptoms are frequently reported during menopause, they aren't necessarily specific to it.
Meaning they could be caused by other things?
Exactly. Think about it. If you're having terrible night sweats and not sleeping, you're going to be irritable and anxious, right?
Of course.
Or maybe you're dealing with midlife stresses, job pressure, aging parents, kids leaving home. These things heavily influence mood, regardless of hormones. So the sources cautioned against automatically blaming menopause for every mood swing.
But hang on, if hormones are swinging wildly, as you said earlier, isn't that bound to directly impact mood and anxiety levels? It feels like a direct biological hit.
Oh, it definitely contributes. That internal chaos is a stressor. Nobody's denying that.
Hmm.
The point is, it's rarely just the hormones in isolation.
Okay.
If someone's sleep deprived because of night sweats and also stressed about work, their anxiety isn't purely a menopausal symptom. It's a result of the whole picture. We need to address the sleep, the stress, and consider the hormonal component to manage it effectively.
That makes sense. It's about looking at the whole person, not just their ovaries.
Precisely.
But is there a more direct cognitive effect? People talk about brain fog. Is that real?
Yes, that seems to be real and more directly linked. There's good evidence for small but measurable average decreases in verbal memory during the perimenopause transition.
Verbal memory, like finding words.
Yeah, word recall, maybe struggling to follow complex conversations sometimes. Researchers think this might be linked to the fluctuating estrogen levels affecting brain function.
Does it get better?
The good news is, for most women, yes. These verbal memory issues tend to resolve once hormone levels stabilize in postmenopause. The worry is when people confuse this temporary fog with early signs of dementia, which causes a lot of unnecessary anxiety.
Okay, that's reassuring. Now let's pivot to the longer-term health implications. Because beyond the immediate symptoms, this transition marks a major shift in the body's protective mechanisms, right?
This is arguably the most critical part of the whole discussion. Why it really matters beyond just feeling comfortable day to day. Estrogen provides significant protection in a couple of major areas.
First up, bones.
Right. Bone health takes a big hit. The fastest rate of bone mineral density loss happens in the year right before the final period and continues for about 2 years after.
That's a critical window.
It really is. This accelerated loss dramatically increases the risk for osteopenia, which is low bone density, and full-blown osteoporosis later on. And that means a much higher risk of fractures, especially hip fractures, which can be devastating.
And the second major area of loss protection.
Cardiovascular health. For decades, a woman's own estrogen provides significant protection against heart disease. That protection largely disappears about 10 years after menopause starts.
How does that manifest? What changes?
The transition itself triggers a shift towards a riskier metabolic profile. We see that increase in abdominal fat we mentioned, plus increased insulin resistance where your body doesn't respond well to insulin, raising blood sugar.
Cholesterol changes too.
Yes, often an adverse shift. LDL, the bad cholesterol, tends to go up, while HDL, the good cholesterol, might drop. And then there's endothelial dysfunction.
That was the blood vessel flexibility issue?
Exactly. The lining of the blood vessels becomes stiffer, less responsive. All these things together, the fat gain, insulin resistance, cholesterol changes, vessel stiffness, they ramp up the lifetime risk for serious cardiometabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes and heart attacks or strokes.
And the sources noted something about symptom severity linking to this risk.
Yes, interestingly, women who have particularly severe hot flashes or those who go through menopause prematurely before age 40 tend to have an even worse cardiometabolic profile. It suggests the intensity of the transition itself might be a marker for underlying risk.
Okay, we've covered the symptoms, the risks. Let's dig into the why. What's actually happening mechanically in the ovaries?
Fundamentally, menopause is natural. It's not a disease. It happens because the ovaries run out of viable eggs, or oocytes. We're born with a finite supply, our ovarian reserve, and over time, that supply dwindles and ages.
And that dwindling supply is what causes the hormonal chaos of perimenopause.
Pretty much. As the reserve gets smaller, there are fewer follicles left to respond to the signals coming from the brain specifically. Follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, and luteinizing hormone, LH.
The brain is telling the ovaries to work, but they can't keep up.
Exactly. The brain sends FSH, trying to stimulate egg development and estrogen production. But with fewer responsive follicles, the ovaries produce less and less estradiol and progesterone.
And is that why FSH levels shoot up later? Because the brain is basically shouting louder and louder.
That's a perfect analogy. The pituitary gland in the brain keeps pumping out more FSH, trying to get a response from the failing ovaries. That super high FSH level is a biological confirmation that menopause has occurred.
So once the ovaries officially retire, does all estrogen production just stop dead?
Not entirely, actually. The body's quite clever. The ovaries stop being the main producers, yes.
Yeah.
But estrogen doesn't vanish completely.
Where does it come from then?
Primarily from fat tissue, especially that abdominal fat we keep mentioning. An enzyme called aromatase, found in fat cells, converts androgens, male-type hormones like testosterone, that are still circulating into a weaker form of estrogen called estrone.
So fat becomes an estrogen factory, in a way.
A secondary one, yes. It provides a baseline level. Plus, small amounts of estrogen are still made locally, right inside other tissues, like bone, blood vessels, and the brain. This local production helps maintain function in those specific areas.
Fascinating. Now, the sources mentioned something about the speed of this ovarian aging process being linked to DNA repair. That sounds complex.
It's really cutting-edge stuff, but the basic idea is important. The theory is that how well your cells can repair DNA damage influences how quickly your ovarian reserve depletes.
How does that work?
Okay, so as we age, the DNA in all our cells accumulates damage, including double-strand breaks. This happens in the dormant egg cells, primordial follicles, too.
And our bodies can usually fix this.
Normally, yes, using sophisticated repair systems. One key system involves genes like BRCA1, you might know from cancer risk. But studies show that the activity of these repair genes decreases specifically in aging oocytes.
So the repairs don't happen properly.
Right. If the DNA damage isn't fixed accurately, the egg cell might dull or just degenerate. This accelerates the loss of follicles from the reserve, leading to an earlier menopause.
Wow, so the same machinery involved in preventing cancer is also tied to reproductive lifespan. That's huge.
It really connects the dots between aging processes.
Let's shift gears slightly. What about when menopause isn't natural? When it's induced medically?
Right, induced menopause. The most common cause is surgery, specifically, having both ovaries removed, which is called a bilateral oophorectomy.
And that's different from natural menopause, how?
It's abrupt. Hormone production stops overnight, completely. This sudden, total drop often causes much more severe and immediate withdrawal symptoms, intense hot flashes, mood changes, compared to the gradual decline of natural menopause.
What if someone has a hysterectomy, uterus removed, but they keep their ovaries? Does that cause menopause?
Not immediately, no, because the ovaries are still there, producing hormones. But interestingly, the sources consistently show that having a hysterectomy, even while keeping the ovaries, often leads to menopause starting earlier than it otherwise would have.
Any idea why?
The thinking is it might disrupt the blood supply to the ovaries slightly, or maybe removing the uterus removes some kind of feedback signal the ovaries rely on. Either way, it seems to accelerate the process, often by about a year and a half.
And then there's the situation called premature ovarian insufficiency, POI.
Yes, POI is when the ovaries stop functioning properly before the age of 40. It affects about 1 to 2% of women.
Do we know what causes POI?
Sometimes. Known causes include autoimmune diseases attacking the ovaries, or damage from chemotherapy or radiation. But frustratingly, in most cases, maybe 50 to 80%, the cause is just unknown. Idiopathic.
How is POI diagnosed for sure?
It requires blood tests showing those persistently high FSH and LH levels, usually checked on several different occasions, confirming the ovaries aren't responding to the brain's signals long before the typical age of menopause.
Okay, so we have this major life transition, sometimes with really difficult symptoms, plus long-term health risks. What's the general approach to managing it? Does everyone need treatment?
The consensus philosophy is quite balanced, actually. Perimenopause and menopause are natural life stages. They aren't diseases that automatically demand medical treatment just because they happen.
So treatment is optional.
It's palliative, really. It's offered when symptoms, physical or emotional, are severe enough to significantly impact someone's quality of life, their ability to work, their relationships. If you're sailing through with minimal issues, you might not need any specific medical intervention for the transition itself, though monitoring long-term health like bone density is still important.
Got it. Let's talk about the main tool for managing those difficult symptoms, menopausal hormone therapy, or MHT.
Right, MHT. This used to be called HRT. It involves taking estrogen, and if you still have a uterus, you also need to take a progestogen to protect the uterine lining from cancer risk.
And how effective is it?
It is, without doubt, the most effective treatment we have for menopausal symptoms, especially those really disruptive hot flashes and night sweats. It's considered the gold standard for VMS relief.
Does it help with other things too?
Yes, definitely. MHT is also very effective at preventing bone loss and reducing the risk of osteoporosis-related fractures. That's a major benefit.
But isn't it usually recommended mainly for symptoms, not just bone health?
Generally, yes. The guidelines usually say MHT for bone health alone should primarily be considered for women at significant fracture risk who can't take other bone-building medications. The main indication remains moderate to severe symptoms.
Now, MHT got a lot of bad press years ago because of studies linking it to risks like blood clots and stroke. What's the current thinking on safety?
This is super important, and the understanding has become much more nuanced. Yes, older studies using specific types of MHT, particularly oral estrogen, did show increased risks for strokes, blood clots, and possibly breast cancer.
But things have changed.
Significantly. The key difference lies in the type and route of estrogen. The current consensus is that using transdermal estrogen, meaning estrogen delivered through the skin via a patch or gel in low to moderate doses, likely does not increase the risk of blood clots or stroke in healthy women starting therapy under age 60 or within 10 years of menopause.
Why does the patch make such a difference compared to a pill?
It's about bypassing the liver on the first pass. When you swallow an estrogen pill, it goes straight to your liver, which processes it in a way that can increase clotting factors in the blood.
Ah.
Transdermal estrogen gets absorbed directly into the bloodstream, avoiding that initial liver hit. This seems to negate much of the negative impact on clotting and cardiovascular risk.
That's a critical distinction for people considering MHT. What about how long someone should stay on it? Is there a time limit?
The old idea of strict time limits, like stopping after 5 years, is largely gone. The current thinking is more individualized. MHT can be continued for as long as the benefits managing symptoms, preventing bone loss if needed, outweigh the potential risks for that specific person. It requires an ongoing conversation with your doctor.
And what if the main issue is sexual function, like low libido after menopause?
MHT with estrogen can help with vaginal dryness, which improves comfort. But for libido specifically, the sources mention that adding a small amount of testosterone therapy can have a positive effect for some postmenopausal women.
Testosterone for women.
Yes, usually in very low doses, often via cream or gel. It can help with sexual desire and function. Like any hormone, it needs careful dosing and monitoring to avoid side effects like acne or hair growth.
Okay, so MHT is the most effective option. But what if someone can't take hormones or chooses not to? Are there non-hormonal medications?
Yes, there are options specifically for the hot flashes, the VMS. Certain antidepressants, particularly SSRIs like paroxetine, have been shown to reduce the frequency and severity of hot flashes.
Antidepressants for hot flashes.
Yeah, it sounds odd, but they work on brain chemistry in a way that helps regulate temperature control for some people. Other options include a nerve medication called gabapentin and a newer drug called fezolinetant, which specifically targets a pathway involved in hot flashes.
But these non-hormonal drugs have limitations, don't they?
They do, a big one. While they can help cool down the hot flashes, they don't do anything for the other systemic effects of low estrogen. They won't help with vaginal dryness, joint pain, or protecting bone density.
Right. So what about lifestyle and behavioral strategies? What actually works according to the evidence?
There are 2 behavioral therapies with pretty solid backing: cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, and clinical hypnosis.
How do they help? They don't stop the hot flashes, do they?
Not directly, no. But they change how you perceive and cope with the hot flashes. They help reduce the distress, the anxiety, the feeling of being overwhelmed by them, and by doing that, they can significantly improve quality of life and sleep.
Interesting. What about all the other things people try? Exercise, yoga, supplements like black cohosh or soy?
Here, the sources were quite clear. The evidence is weak or inconsistent. There's currently not enough high-quality data to definitively say that general exercise, yoga, special breathing techniques, or things like cooling fans actually reduce the frequency or severity of the hot flashes themselves.
Really? Not even exercise?
Not specifically for reducing hot flashes, based on current rigorous studies. Exercise is fantastic for overall health, bone health, mood, weight management, all crucial during this time. But the direct impact on VMS isn't strongly proven yet.
And supplements. Soy, isoflavones, black cohosh. They're everywhere.
Yeah, widely marketed, but again, the scientific evidence from good quality trials is just not consistently there to support their use for reliable symptom relief. Same goes for acupuncture. For hot flashes, results are mixed.
So where does lifestyle definitely play a role?
Weight management is important. Having a higher BMI is linked to worse hot flashes, so losing excess weight can help. And there's growing interest in the gut microbiome.
The gut. How does that connect?
Hormonal fluctuations can mess with the balance of bacteria in your gut. So focusing on a diet that supports a healthy gut, lots of fiber, fermented foods, avoiding too much sugar and alcohol might potentially help mitigate some systemic inflammation or symptoms. More research is needed, but it makes sense biologically.
Okay. Lastly, let's touch on specific treatments for those persistent urogenital symptoms, the dryness and discomfort.
Right, because those often don't go away on their own. First, it's useful to know the difference between vaginal moisturizers and lubricants. Moisturizers are used regularly, maybe a few times a week, to provide ongoing hydration and combat general dryness. Lubricants are used specifically during sex to reduce friction and pain.
And if those aren't enough,
Then the most effective treatment is low-dose vaginal estrogen. This comes in creams, tablets, or rings that are inserted directly into the vagina.
is that safe, given the concerns about systemic MHT?
Generally, yes. The dose is very low, and very little estrogen gets absorbed into the rest of the bloodstream. It acts locally to restore the vaginal tissues, making them thicker and more lubricated without carrying the same systemic risks as oral or higher-dose transdermal MHT. It's considered very safe for most women, even many breast cancer survivors, after discussion with their oncologist.
We've spent a lot of time on the biology, the physiology, but the sources really emphasize that menopause isn't just a biological event. The experience is hugely shaped by context, right?
Absolutely. It's what we call a biopsychosocial experience.
Yeah.
Your psychology matters, your past experiences, your expectations, and your social world matters. Your culture, your stress levels, the meaning your society attaches to this transition.
So, how you think about menopause actually changes how you feel it.
There's strong evidence for that. Studies show women who view menopause primarily as a medical problem or a sign of decline tend to report more negative symptoms than women who see it as a natural life stage or even a symbol of wisdom or freedom.
And expectations matter before it even starts.
Yes, if you go into perimenopause expecting it to be awful, you are statistically more likely to have a worse experience, which leads into some of the feminist critiques.
Which argue what?
That sometimes menopause gets framed in our culture not just as a natural process, but as a kind of endpoint, tied to the idea that a woman's value is primarily in her reproductive capacity. So cessation of fertility becomes linked culturally to a loss of social significance.
That's a heavy thought. Let's look at how this plays out globally, because the variations are striking. It really challenges that purely medical view.
It really does. It highlights this idea of local biologies,
Right.
how our environment and culture shape our physical experience. Even within the U.S., there are differences.
Like what?
Studies show, for instance, that African-American women report higher rates of vasomotor symptoms, hot flashes, while Caucasian women may report more mood or psychosomatic-type symptoms.
Is that genetic, though? Or something else?
This is where it gets really interesting. A lot of anthropological and biosocial research argue strongly against a simple genetic explanation.
Okay.
They link the higher symptom severity and earlier onset, sometimes seen in African-American women, to the cumulative impact of psychosocial stress over a lifetime.
You mean things like discrimination, economic pressure?
Exactly. Chronic stress from racial discrimination, lower socioeconomic status, heavier caregiving burdens.
Yeah.
The idea is that these chronic stressors become literally embodied. They impact biology, potentially accelerating ovarian aging and worsening the physical experience of the transition.
So social inequality can physically manifest as worse menopausal symptoms.
That's the powerful argument being made, that our social world gets under our skin physiologically. And we see the flip side in cultures where menopause isn't stigmatized.
Like where? What's an example?
The sources often mention women in rural Laos or highland Mayan communities in Mexico. In these cultures, menopause is often viewed neutrally or even positively.
And they report fewer symptoms.
Dramatically fewer, or at least fewer distressing symptoms. One study of Mayan women found almost 70% reported no bothersome health changes at all. They just saw it as a natural part of life, no big deal.
Wow. Is it that the hot flashes literally don't happen, or they just don't interpret them as a problem?
It's probably more the interpretation of the lack of negative cultural baggage. The underlying hormonal shift still happens, but if your culture doesn't tell you this is a terrible decline, if there's no shame or fear attached, the physical sensations might just be sensations, not symptoms needing treatment.
Fascinating. What about Japan? They have a specific word for it, kanenki.
Yes, and traditionally, Japanese women reported much lower rates of hot flashes compared to Western women. Their common kanenki complaints were often different things like shoulder stiffness, fatigue, dizziness, maybe feeling chilly.
Why the difference?
Again, likely local biology, influenced by diet, lifestyle, maybe even how doctors frame the experience. Interestingly, some early Japanese medical texts even described kanenki as almost a luxury disease of middle-class urban women, suggesting lifestyle factors were seen as key.
This brings us to groups often left out of the conversation entirely. LGBTQIA+ individuals, Menopause is so heavily coded as female, tied to menstruation and fertility.
Exactly. That strict binary framing creates huge challenges for non-binary folks and trans men going through menopause, or trans women experiencing hormonal shifts due to therapy.
How does it impact them?
It can really affect their sense of gender identity, sometimes affirming, sometimes causing distress, especially if the experience feels overly feminized by society or doctors. And finding knowledgeable, supportive healthcare is a major struggle.
The medical system isn't equipped.
Often not. The sources highlight that many doctors lack training in the specific needs of trans and non-binary people regarding menopause. Surveys show this group feels less involved in treatment decisions and often feel their unique concerns aren't understood or addressed, creating real barriers to care.
That definitely needs to change. Finally, let's connect this back to the workplace. Midlife is often peak career time, but also peak stress time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Women aged 45-54 consistently report the highest levels of work-related stress in places like the UK. Now add severe menopausal symptoms on top of that, sleep deprivation from night sweats, difficulty concentrating due to brain fog, maybe embarrassment about hot flashes in meetings.
It's a recipe for professional disruption.
Hugely disruptive.
And cost.
And costly. There was a recent U.S. study, 2023, that tried to quantify it.
What did it find?
It estimated an annual economic loss of around $1.8 billion in the U.S. alone. That's from lost workdays, people reducing hours, or just lower productivity because of unmanaged menopausal symptoms.
1.8 billion, that's staggering.
It really is. And it makes a powerful case, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We urgently need better access to effective treatments, yes, but also much more supportive and understanding workplace cultures and policies.
Yeah.
It's not just a personal issue, it's an economic one. #tag outro.
Wow. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from, the details of DNA repair in the ovaries and why a skin patch might be safer for hormone therapy, all the way to how cultural attitudes and chronic stress can literally change the physical experience of this transition.
It really underscores that dual nature, doesn't it? Menopause is absolutely a biological reality driven by ovarian aging, but it's also this incredibly diverse experience, shaped profoundly by our society, our stress levels, how our culture views aging women.
And just to wrap up, that historical tidbit about the word menopause itself is kind of mind-blowing. It wasn't an ancient term.
No, not at all. The ancient Greeks didn't really medicalize the end of periods. The word menopause was actually coined by French doctors relatively recently in 1821.
And the reason they coined it is revealing.
It really is. They noticed that rural peasant women who worked physically hard didn't seem to complain much about symptoms when their periods stopped, but middle-class women in the cities did.
So they didn't blame hormones.
Not initially. They actually blamed the symptoms on what they saw as a decadent, unhealthy urban lifestyle, sitting around too much rich food, alcohol. They thought the city lifestyle was causing the problems, not necessarily the hormonal change itself.
Which brings us perfectly to our final provocative thought for you, the listener.
Right.
If the word menopause was basically invented in 1821 to label symptoms seen mostly in women living a newly urbanized, perhaps more stressful, sedentary life, what common experiences are we medicalizing today?
What things are we labeling as disorders needing treatment that future generations might look back on and see differently?
Sure.
Maybe as just a natural part of the human life cycle, or perhaps as symptoms deeply influenced by our current lifestyles, stresses, and social conditions.
Something definitely worth thinking about.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're heading way, way up into the Himalayas, maybe chasing is the wrong word. We're investigating a legend, a big one.
Yeah, the big furry one, the Yeti, or as most people in the West know it, the abominable snowman.
Exactly. And we've got a mountain of sources: folklore, expedition logs, cryptozoology takes, even cutting-edge DNA analysis. It's quite the mix.
It really is. And our goal today, I think, is to sift through all of it. We want to understand where this whole story came from, the local beliefs, the Western interpretations.
Is it sensationalism?
Oh, definitely the sensationalism.
Yeah.
And then, figure out what the science actually tells us now. We're trying to separate the Hollywood monster from the, let's say, biological reality, if there is one.
Right. Not necessarily proving or disproving, but understanding the journey of the idea itself.
Precisely. And it's important to remember, this isn't Bigfoot we're talking about today. That's North America. We're focused squarely on the Asian cryptids, the ones said to roam the high mountains, Nepal, Bhutan, China, India, even bits of Siberia, apparently.
A vast, incredibly tough landscape to track anything in, let alone a legend.
Exactly, which is part of the story itself.
Okay, so let's start with the image. When Western explorers started bringing back these tales, what picture were they painting? What did this thing supposedly look like?
Well, the sort of composite sketch that emerged, heavily influenced by Western ideas of wild men and apes, was this large, upright creature. Bipedal, definitely ape-like.
And hairy, right. Covered in fur.
Oh yeah, covered in hair. Though the color, that gets interesting. Reports mention brown, gray, sometimes reddish-brown, especially at lower altitudes. That classic image of a pure white snowman-like thing, that seems to be more of a later invention, probably for dramatic effect.
Okay. So more like a big, hairy, apish thing, often brownish or grayish, sometimes with big teeth in the scarier local tales.
Yes, some of the indigenous folklore does describe it as having large, sharp teeth, really playing up that fearsome aspect, which of course made for great newspaper copy back home.
But the name itself, the local name, Yeti, that doesn't sound quite so monstrous. Where does that actually come from?
Right, this is kind of the first big clue, linguistically speaking. The word Yeti isn't some ancient term for demon or monster. It comes from Tibetan.
Okay.
Specifically, it's thought to derive from the term ji.ya dread,
Okay.
and the translation is surprisingly, well, normal. It means rocky bear.
Rocky bear, not snow bear or man bear, just bear of the rocks.
Essentially, yes, bear of the rocky place. And there's a neat linguistic detail here. The Tibetan word for bear, dread, apparently has a very soft R sound.
Uh-huh.
So when non-native speakers heard it or tried to write it down phonetically, that R could easily get lost, making it sound like day or tay or T.
Ah, so Gia Dread becomes something like Yate or Yeti.
Exactly. So the name itself points directly to the locals identifying, well, a bear, an animal they knew lived in those rocky areas.
Okay, that's fascinating. If the local term basically means rock bear, how on earth did we end up with the abominable snowman? That's a huge jump.
It's an incredible story, really, a classic case of journalistic flair, you could say. It all traces back to 1921 and Lieutenant Colonel Charles Howard Bury's Everest expedition.
Right, the reconnaissance mission, they found tracks.
They did. Very large tracks in the snow, up high, around 21,000 feet on the Lagpula Pass.
And what did Howard Bury think they were? Was he convinced it was a monster?
Not at all. He was quite dismissive, actually. He suspected they were probably made by a large wolf, maybe loping through the snow, and the prints got distorted and enlarged by the sun melting the edges.
Standard explanation for weird tracks in the snow.
Pretty much. But his Sherpa guides, they had a different take. They immediately pointed to the tracks and said they belonged to the Meto Kungmi.
Meto Kungmi. And that's the key phrase.
That's the one. It translates roughly as man-bear-snowman. So still connected to bears, but with that man element in there too.
Okay, man-bear snowman. Still a way off from abominable.
Totally.
Yeah.
So the expedition gets back, and a journalist in Calcutta named Henry Newman, who wrote for The Statesman, interviews some of the returning porters. He hears this term, Meto Kungmi.
And gets creative.
Wildly creative. He focuses on the meadow part, meaning man-bear. Now, apparently meadow could also be interpreted, maybe stretched, to mean something like filthy or dirty.
Okay.
So Newman, thinking about his audience back west, decides filthy snowman isn't quite dramatic enough. He makes this huge leap. He substitutes filthy with abominable.
Just like that, for the shock value.
Purely for the headlines. He even apparently wrote later that the whole story seemed like such a joyous creation he couldn't resist sending it out. And boom, the abominable snowman is born and explodes worldwide.
Wow. So arguably the most famous cryptid name ever is basically down to one journalist jazzing up a translation.
Pretty much. It's a perfect example of how a myth can get constructed, almost accidentally, through media excitement. And it got even muddier later when some people apparently misheard or mistyped meadow as mech, which isn't even a real Tibetan word, just layers of confusion.
Incredible. But let's pivot back to the local perspective. Because the Sherpas and other Himalayan peoples, they didn't just have one word Yeti. They had a whole system, right? They seem to recognize different types.
Absolutely crucial point. The indigenous understanding was much richer, much more nuanced. They clearly distinguished between different kinds of large, hairy creatures they encountered or heard stories about, often based on size, behavior, and where they lived. This really suggests they were observing and categorizing actual animals, most likely different types of bears.
Okay, so let's break down their categories. What was the biggest, baddest one?
That would be the Nealmo. This is the real giant of the legends, described as maybe 15 feet tall, incredibly fierce, often with black fur. If you're looking for the origin of the terrifying movie Monster Yeti, the Nealmo stories are probably it.
15 feet. Okay, that's big. Then there was a medium-sized one.
Yep, the Chitty. This one's described as being around 8 feet tall, and significantly, its habitat is often specified living between about 8,000 and 10,000 feet. That kind of detail suggests it's linked to a real animal known to prefer that specific altitude zone.
Makes sense. And the smallest one?
That's the Rangshimbombo, described as only 3 to 5 feet tall, so quite a bit smaller, and often having reddish-brown fur.
So 3 distinct sizes and looks. And there are other terms, too.
Yeah, functional terms, like zute. That specifically means cattle bear, and it refers to the Himalayan brown bear, which, sometimes raids livestock. Very practical name.
Uh-huh.
And then you have more general terms like Miche, which is another sort of man-bear type name, and Migoe or Migo, which just means wild man or wild person.
It really shows, doesn't it? The locals were doing practical taxonomy based on what they saw, while the West just lumped everything together into this one sensational, abominable snowman.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the Himalayas. The sources mention a parallel over in Siberia.
Right, the Chichuna.
Yeah, similar idea. A large, hairy, reclusive wild man figure, described as maybe 6 or 7 feet tall, dark hair, sometimes said to look a bit Neanderthal-like.
Yeah.
And some of the more grim stories, supposedly cannibalistic.
So this theme of large, elusive, hairy bipeds runs across remote Asian mountain ranges.
Seems like it. Often dark-haired, often linked to bears in some way, filtering into local folklore.
Okay, so we've got ancient folklore, we've got linguistic mix-ups, and we've got local knowledge of bears, but the myth wouldn't have persisted without actual sightings, right? Or at least reported sightings. These go way back, even before the abominable name.
Oh, absolutely. The idea of these creatures was woven into the cultural fabric long before Westerners showed up with notebooks.
Yeah.
You had the Lepcha people worshiping a glacier being, basically a god of the hunt tied to these high, remote places.
And the Bun religion had beliefs, too.
Yeah. Followers of Bun, a pre-Buddhist tradition, believed the blood of the male god, their term for wild man, had special powers, maybe medicinal or spiritual uses. They even described it carrying a big stone as a weapon and making a specific whistling sound. These are quite detailed attributes.
But when the first Western reports started trickling out in the 19th century, the reaction was mostly skepticism, wasn't it? Like B.H. Hodgson in 1832.
Right. Hodgson wrote about it in the Journal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. His local guides told him they saw a tall, hairy, bipedal creature that ran away when spotted. Hodgson, being the outsider scientist, just concluded it must have been an orangutan.
An orangutan in the Himalayas.
Yeah, completely wrong geographically, but it shows the mindset trying to fit the report into a known category, even if it didn't really fit.
And Lawrence Waddell in 1899 had a similar take.
Pretty much. He heard descriptions from his guides about an ape-like creature leaving tracks. He looked at the tracks and said, "Nope, that's a bear." He also commented on how hard it was to get reliable first-hand accounts. So you see the pattern. Local report of a wild man, Western observer says bear, or maybe monkey.
But that skepticism got kind of steamrolled in the 20th century with the big mountaineering expeditions, right? That's when the sightings started coming from Westerners themselves.
Exactly. Suddenly you had reputable explorers, photographers, members of geographical societies reporting things. That changed the game. N.A. Tombazi's sighting in 1925 is often seen as the first really modern account.
What was his story? What made it credible?
Well, Tombazi was a photographer with the Royal Geographical Society. He was near the Zimu Glacier, pretty high up, maybe 15,000 feet. He said he saw this dark figure standing upright, definitely human-like in shape, about 200 300 yards away.
Doing what?
He said it seemed to be stopping occasionally to pull at or maybe eat dwarf rhododendron bushes. He watched it for about a minute before it disappeared.
Okay, a direct visual. And he found tracks later.
Yeah, when his party went down to the spot later, they found footprints. And he specifically described them as being similar in shape to those of a man, clearly bipedal, about 6 or 7 inches long. Coming from a credible source like Tombazi, that carried weight.
But the evidence that really burned the Yeti into everyone's imagination, the visual proof, was the Shipton photos from 1951. Those tracks are iconic.
Absolutely iconic. Eric Shipton, another highly respected mountaineer, took these photos of huge footprints way up at 20,000 feet on the Menlungsted Glacier during an Everest reconnaissance. The most famous one shows a single, really clear print next to an ice axe for scale.
And these prints looked weird, right? Not like typical bear tracks.
That was the argument. They looked very large, very broad. Some analysis, particularly later by cryptozoologists like Jeffrey Meldrum, looking at casts or reconstructions, suggested really unusual features, like maybe 2 very large toes and 3 smaller ones bunched up.
2 large toes, like primate-like.
Sort of. Meldrum talked about possible macrodactyly enlarged toes and maybe a flexible midfoot structure, more like a great ape than the rigid foot of a bear. The argument was these specific tracks couldn't easily be explained away as just distorted bear prints. They looked too unique.
But there were issues with the photos, too.
Well, the big issue is that Shipton apparently only took photos of maybe 1 or 2 prints in a short sequence. You don't have a long trackway to analyze gait. And, snow melts, it distorts things. Even proponents like Meldrum admitted it's hard to be absolutely certain based on just a couple of photos of melting snow prints.
Right. Still, incredibly compelling images. But the 50s weren't just about footprints. People started bringing back physical relics, didn't they? Like the Pangboche scalp from the Daily Mail expedition.
Ah, yes, the scalp saga.
Yeah.
A 1954 Daily Mail expedition managed to borrow or acquire pieces of what was claimed to be a Yeti scalp kept as a relic in the Pangboche Monastery. They brought back hair samples.
And they had them analyzed.
They did, by a Professor Frederick Wood Jones. His analysis was interesting. He stated very clearly the hair was not from a bear and also not from any known anthropoid ape.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, that part fueled a lot of excitement. But then came the but. He also concluded it wasn't actually a scalp at all. The way the hair grew didn't match the scalp pattern of any known mammal. His final verdict: the sample likely came from the shoulder or back of a coarse-haired hoofed animal.
A hoofed animal? Like what?
His best guess was the Himalayan serow, which is sort of a local goat antelope species known for its very coarse, dark hair. So mystery solved, but not the way believers hoped. It was just a piece of an ordinary local animal, probably shaped into a scalp relic.
Another dead end, scientifically speaking. But the mystique around these relics was powerful. There's that crazy story involving the actor James Stewart.
Right. The Pangboche hand. This is a few years later, 1959. Apparently, Peter Byrne, one of the Daily Mail expedition members, persuaded the Pangboche monks to let him borrow this mummified hand relic.
Wow.
The story goes that James Stewart and his wife were traveling in India, met Byrne, and Stewart agreed to smuggle the hand out of the country in his wife's luggage, hidden amongst her undergarments, to avoid customs issues.
You're kidding. James Stewart smuggled a Yeti hand?
It's the legend. He got it back to London where it was eventually analyzed.
What was it?
Well, years later, DNA testing was finally done on a finger bone from the hand. The result: human.
Human. So, not a cirrus, not an ape, just a person's hand.
Yep. Likely the hand of a deceased monk or some other human may be modified or presented as a relic to look more mysterious or significant. Again, culturally important, but not evidence of an unknown primate.
Wow. So the scalp was a goat antelope, the hand was human, and Sir Edmund Hillary had a similar experience with a scalp relic too, right?
He did. In 1960, Hillary, who was always very skeptical about the Yeti, led an expedition designed partly to investigate the claims. He borrowed a supposed Yeti scalp from the Kumjung Monastery, sent it off for analysis.
Same result.
Same result. Analysis pointed squarely back to the serow, that same coarse-haired hoofed animal. The pattern was becoming pretty clear. These monastic relics, while fascinating cultural objects, were made from known local animals.
It seems like this cycle of excitement, claim, and then debunking just keeps repeating, even recently.
It really does. You had the Destination Truth TV show team finding those big footprints in 2007. Initially, even Jeff Meldrum thought they looked remarkably convincing, morphologically accurate.
But he changed his mind.
Yeah, later analysis suggested they could have been faked or were perhaps just unusual erosional features or distorted tracks after all. Then there was that bizarre Russian conference in 2011.
Oh, yeah, the one claiming 95% proof.
Exactly. Held in Siberia, local officials making these grand claims. Meldrum was actually there, but he later basically said it was a total publicity stunt to boost tourism. No real evidence presented.
And even the Indian Army got in on it in 2019.
Yep. Tweeted photos of mysterious footprints near the Makalu base camp. They were huge, like 32 by 15 inches. But again, widely dismissed by scientists as likely being distorted tracks. Probably bear prints melted and merged by the sun and wind. No follow-up biological evidence ever emerged.
It feels like the desire to believe is just incredibly strong.
It really is. The legend has serious staying power.
Okay, let's get to the scientific core of why belief is so difficult biologically speaking. You mentioned the skepticism about population size earlier, the James Randi argument.
Right, this is the fundamental biological problem for almost all large cryptids. For a species like the Yeti described as a large primate to exist and persist over time, you don't just need one or two individuals, you need a viable breeding population.
Thousands.
Probably at least hundreds, maybe more, spread out over that vast, harsh territory to avoid inbreeding and maintain genetic diversity. And a creature that large would need a lot of food, a significant ecological footprint. The idea that such a large population of large animals could remain completely hidden, leaving no definitive physical evidence, no bodies, bones, droppings, hair samples that aren't explained away, becomes incredibly improbable in the modern age.
Especially with satellites, climbers everywhere, camera traps.
Exactly. It just doesn't add up biologically for something that big to be that elusive. So the most logical scientific explanation has always leaned towards misidentification.
And the usual suspects were always bears.
Bears were always top of the list. The Himalayan brown bear, or dzute as locals call it, the Tibetan blue bear, which is a subspecies of brown bear, and especially as we'll get into the Asiatic black bear, sometimes maybe langur monkeys at lower altitudes getting mistaken for something stranger.
But just saying it's a bear doesn't quite explain those really weird Shipton tracks, does it? That's where the more detailed bear theory comes in.
Precisely. It's not enough to just say bear. You need to explain how a bear can leave a track that looks so convincingly like a large flat-footed hominid print. This is where Reinhold Messner's claims, and especially Daniel C. Taylor's work, become critical.
Messner, the famous mountaineer, he claimed he saw one.
Messner claimed he had encounters in the 80s and concluded the Yeti was definitely the Himalayan brown bear, maybe a particularly large or unusually behaving one. But the really elegant explanation for the tracks, especially the Shipton-type tracks, came from research focusing on the Asiatic black bear, Ursus tibetanus. This work gained steam after discoveries in Nepal's Barun Valley in the early 80s.
Okay, Asiatic black bear. What's special about them that makes their tracks look weird?
It's a combination of anatomy and behavior. First, the anatomy gets modified by behavior. Young Asiatic black bears climb trees a lot, often to escape bigger male bears.
Right, self-preservation.
And this constant climbing, gripping branches apparently trains the muscles and tendons of their paws. Specifically, it tends to splay the innermost claw, the one analogous to our thumb or big toe, slightly outward.
Okay, so climbing changes their paw structure a bit, giving them almost an opposable grip.
Exactly. It creates the illusion of a thumb or a big toe, a hallux, when you look at their print. Now, combine that anatomical quirk with how they walk, especially in snow on slips.
They walk upright sometimes.
Oh yeah, bears stand and walk bipedally quite often when they're curious, when they're threatened, or sometimes just to get a better view or footing, especially going slightly uphill. And when they walk bipedally in snow...
The overprinting happens.
Yes. The crucial mechanism. As the bear steps forward, its longer rear paw lands almost exactly in or slightly overlapping the print just made by the shorter front paw.
Ah, so the back foot steps on the front foot's print.
Right. And because the rear foot is longer and lands with force, it obliterates the details of the front print and elongates the whole impression. What you're left with isn't two clear prints, but one big, smeared, elongated track.
And with that splayed inner claw impression.
It looks remarkably like a huge flat-footed hominid print with the distinct big toe or thumb at the side or base. It perfectly matches the descriptions and photos of the most compelling Yeti tracks, like Shipton's.
That is a remarkably specific and convincing explanation. It accounts for the shape, the size, the big toe.
It really does. It moves beyond just waving a hand and saying bear to providing a plausible biomechanical process for creating that specific type of misleading evidence.
And this research, driven by trying to solve the Yeti mystery, had real-world consequences.
Huge positive consequences. The work done by Taylor and others studying these bears in their habitats in places like the Barun Valley directly led to major conservation efforts.
Like national parks.
Exactly. The establishment of the Makalu Barun National Park in Nepal and the Komalangma National Nature Preserve over the border in China were, in part, spurred on by the scientific interest generated by the Yeti legend and the need to understand and protect the bears that were likely its source.
So in a way, the search for the mythical Yeti helped save the real bears.
It's a fantastic outcome, isn't it? The legend indirectly led to the protection of millions of acres of habitat for the Himalayan brown bear and the Asiatic black bear. The Yeti is a bear, and searching for it helped protect its home.
That's brilliant. And this theory also finally put the nail in the coffin for the Shipton photo, right?
It seems so. Daniel Taylor, in 2017, published a really thorough analysis. He didn't just re-examine the famous photo. He apparently found a second, previously unpublished photo of the same track sequence in the archives of the Royal Geographical Society.
A second photo. What did it show?
Critically, it showed faint scratch marks in the snow within the print, marks that were consistent with bear claws.
Ah, details missing or unclear in the first photo.
Exactly. Seeing those claw marks, combined with the understanding of the overprinting mechanism and the splayed inner digit of the Asiatic black bear, well, it pretty much sealed the deal. The world's most famous piece of Yeti evidence was almost certainly a distorted bear track.
Okay, so the track evidence seems pretty well explained by bears. That leaves the final piece of the modern puzzle, the DNA evidence. This started with quite a bang in 2013, didn't it?
It certainly did. Professor Brian Sykes at Oxford University put out a call for anyone with alleged Yeti samples, hair, bone fragments, anything to send them in for analysis. He focused on mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down the maternal line.
And he got some samples. What did he find?
He analyzed several, but 2 hair samples yielded truly startling results. The mtDNA sequences didn't match any currently living bear species.
Whoa. So not a brown bear, not black bear, not polar bear?
Not modern ones. Instead, the DNA sequence was a perfect match for DNA extracted from the jawbone of an ancient polar bear that lived tens of thousands of years ago, maybe 40,000 to 120,000 years ago, found in Svalbard, Norway.
An ancient polar bear? In the Himalayas? How?
Well, the immediate speculation was that maybe it wasn't a pure ancient polar bear, but evidence of a surviving hybrid lineage, perhaps an ancient cross between polar bears and brown bears that had somehow persisted in isolation in the high Himalayas. It caused a huge media sensation. The Yeti might be real, just weirder than expected.
A prehistoric polar bear hybrid? That's wild. But science doesn't usually stop at the first surprising result, does it?
No, it doesn't. And other researchers were intrigued, maybe a bit skeptical. A larger, more comprehensive study was put together, published in 2017. This team gathered many more purported Yeti samples from museum collections, relics, even including hair, believed to be from the same source as Sykes samples. They used more rigorous methods and compared the DNA to a much wider database of bear genetics.
Okay, the big follow-up study, what did they find?
Their results were pretty definitive and less exciting for Yeti believers. They analyzed 9 different samples claimed to be Yeti. Every single one matched the DNA of known living animals found in the region.
All of them. What animals?
Mostly bears, as expected. They found DNA from the Himalayan brown bear, the Tibetan blue bear, which is, again, a type of brown bear, and the Asiatic black bear. Oh, and one sample turned out to be from a domestic dog.
A dog. Seriously?
Yep. Someone's Yeti sample was just dog hair. But the main finding was clear. There was no sign of any unknown primate, no ancient polar bear hybrid. All the physical evidence, when subjected to rigorous DNA analysis, pointed back to known local fauna, primarily bears.
So, scientifically, that really closes the case, doesn't it? The Yeti, as a biological entity distinct from known animals, seems to be definitively explained. It's a composite legend based on bears.
That's certainly the overwhelming scientific consensus based on all the available evidence, from linguistics to tracks to DNA. The bears fit the descriptions, the locations, the track morphology under certain conditions, and now the genetics.
Is there any lingering possibility? What about that Gigantopithecus idea that sometimes pops up, the giant extinct ape?
Ah, Gigantopithecus. It's the go-to explanation for many large, ape-like cryptids. And yes, Gigantopithecus blacki was a truly enormous ape that lived in Asia, maybe up to 10 feet tall, weighing perhaps half a ton.
So could the Yeti be a surviving relic population?
It's considered a real long shot by almost all scientists. Firstly, the timing is often accurate. Gigantopithecus is thought to have gone extinct hundreds of thousands of years ago. There's zero fossil evidence of it surviving later, especially in the Himalayas. Secondly, locomotion. Yeti reports consistently describe a bipedal creature.
And Gigantopithecus wasn't.
The general consensus is that it was likely quadrupedal, maybe moving like a giant orangutan or gorilla, using its knuckles or fists. For an animal that massive to become an efficient bipedal walker in the high, cold, rugged Himalayas would require significant evolutionary changes that we have no evidence for. It just doesn't seem plausible as a candidate for the Yeti.
So bears remain the solid explanation.
Overwhelmingly, yes.
Okay, what a fascinating journey. We've gone from these terrifying local legends like the Nyalmo, through the accidental coining of the abominable snowman, chased footprints across glaciers, examined bits of skin and bone.
And ended up looking at mitochondrial DNA sequences.
Right, and the conclusion seems pretty clear. The Yeti story is this amazing tapestry woven from threads of cultural folklore about wild men, linguistic misunderstandings, the very real presence of large bears, and the way snow and distance can play tricks on the eyes and the ground.
It really is. But what I find genuinely great about this whole story, the so what of it, is that positive outcome we talked about. The scientific quest to understand the Yeti, even though it ended up debunking the myth, directly contributed to conserving the actual animals and ecosystems that inspired it.
That conservation angle is huge. The Makalu Baroon Park, the Kwamulangma Preserve, real-world benefits came from chasing a legend. It's a much better ending than just saying myth busted.
Absolutely. It shows how even mysteries and folklore can drive scientific inquiry in ways that ultimately help us understand and protect the natural world better.
So we've pretty much put the Yeti to bed as a bear. But the sources did leave us with one final thought, didn't they? Something a bit more open-ended about these wild man legends in general.
Yeah, it relates to that discovery of Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbit species, found on an island in Indonesia. Remember Henry G., the editor at Nature? His perspective was mentioned.
What was his point?
His argument was that finding Homo floresiensis, which was a distinct and tiny human species that survived until relatively recently, maybe 50,000 years ago, makes it, in his view, more plausible, not less, that other isolated pockets of unknown hominids or primates could have survived elsewhere undetected.
So just because the Yeti turned out to be a bear doesn't mean all wild man legends globally are necessarily bunk.
That's the provocative idea. Homo floresiensis proves that small relic hominid populations can remain hidden for a very, very long time in isolated environments. While the Himalayan Yeti case seems closed, does the existence of the Hobbit hint that maybe, just maybe, some other remote corner of the world does hold a genuine biological basis for its own wild man stories? It kind of keeps the door slightly ajar for future discoveries, doesn't it? Makes you wonder what else might be out there, waiting for its own deep dive.